In this video, I want to discuss the difference between an element, a mixture, and a compound. An element is a substance in which all atoms are the same. And if we look at the periodic table, this is what the periodic table is made up of. Substances where all atoms are the same. If we look at copper, copper is an element because it's made up of all atoms which are the same. And what we mean by the same is that it has an atomic number of 29. So this piece of copper over here is, no matter how small we break up this copper, it will still have atoms which have an atomic number of 29. And as a reminder, the atomic number means the number of protons. And the number of protons is what makes up what the element is. So what makes copper copper is the fact that it has 29 protons. If we mix something else into the copper, then we can't say anymore that each atom is the same. So what makes this copper is the fact that there's only one kind of atom or one type of atom in here. If we go back to the periodic table and we look at zinc, zinc is also an element, and its atomic number is 30. So each zinc atom is made up of 30 protons. And it's the same thing as any other element in the periodic table. In this zinc, there is only one type of atom. So we have a definition of what an element is. Now, elements can exist in nature as single atoms. So if we come back to the periodic table and we look at the noble gases do exist in nature as individual atoms. However, if we look at the diatomic molecules, which are made up of hydrogen, as well as nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine, these are 7, meaning these 6 over here together with the hydrogen are 7 diatomic molecules. They exist in nature as 2 atoms together. So hydrogen will be written as H2, nitrogen will be written as N2, and so on. All of them exist in nature as 2 atoms together. So we have elements can exist as individual atoms, or they can exist as molecules, which is made up of 2 or more atoms. So these are molecules. But let's go back to the atoms again that we said exist in nature as individual atoms are the noble gases. And now the molecules, we said they are diatomic molecules which exist in nature as 2 or more atoms. Now these are still made up of individual elements. Hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine are individual elements, but they exist in nature as 2 atoms together, and we call that a molecule. Another example of a molecule is diamond. Diamond is made up of carbon, and each carbon atom is surrounded by another 4 carbon atoms. And there are other elements that exist as molecules as well. So now let's discuss mixtures. We can have two types of mixtures. We can have a homogeneous mixture, or we can have a heterogeneous mixture. A homogeneous mixture is a mixture in where all parts of the mixture are made up of the same parts, as opposed to a heterogeneous mixture where the parts separate. So let's discuss a homogeneous mixture. Brass is not on the periodic table, and the reason is because brass can be separated into two different elements. Brass is made up of zinc. We have the zinc over here, as well as copper. So it's made up of two different elements. So this, in addition, it can be made up of many different ratios. We can add more copper if we want, we can add less copper, we can add more zinc or less zinc. And because it's in two different, we can have it in different ratios, it is not a compound, and rather it's a mixture. Meaning, if it would have to be in a specific ratio, then we would not consider it a mixture, and then we would consider that a compound. So another definition that we have for brass is that it's a physical change. And we don't consider it a chemical reaction. This is physical change. And it is not a chemical reaction. I will cross this off to just show that this is not what it is. So, as we said, a homogeneous mixture would, for example, be brass, which is made from copper and zinc. Other examples of homogeneous mixtures would be water and sugar, or impure gold. If we take pure gold and mix it with other metals, it's a mixture. A heterogeneous mixture is where the parts of the mixture separate, and we said that would be water and oil. So now, we alluded to this with brass, that brass is not a compound and it's a mixture because it can be made up of many different ratios. Water is made up of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. We can't make water with 2 hydrogens and 2 oxygens, or the opposite, 1 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. That would not be water. So again, a compound is made up of 2 different atoms in a very specific ratio. And we can have that as a molecule, or we can have that as an ionic compound. And as we said, a molecule can be made up of 2 hydrogens, and hydrogen is one of the diatomic molecules. The 2 over here, as well as the 2 here and the 2 here, should really be a subscript, but my program doesn't allow me to do it. So we have to have the exact amount. We have to have 2 hydrogen molecules with 1 oxygen molecule will give us 2 H2Os. If we were to add in more oxygen, we'd be left over with extra oxygen. if we were to put in more hydrogen, we'd be left over with hydrogen. So for the reaction to happen, we have to have the exact ratios. And this is what makes it a compound. An example of an ionic compound would be 2 sodiums with 1 chlorine molecule, which is another example of a diatomic molecule, which would give us 2 NaCl, which is table salt. So to sum everything up, I put together a chart over here, a small little diagram, which demonstrates that the elements are made up of pure substances. And here I put gold down as an example, which is Au. That would be an element. A molecule would be one of the diatomic molecules, which would be oxygen. Compounds can also be molecules, and this can be confusing at first, but a molecule is made up of 2 or more atoms, and it doesn't make a difference if it's atoms of the same element or atoms of different elements. So oxygen can be a molecule because it's 2 atoms, and it's still a molecule even though it's from the same element. Water is a molecule because it's made up of actually 3 atoms of different elements. It's made up of 2 hydrogen atoms with 1 oxygen atom, and therefore it's a molecule because it's made up of 2 or more atoms. An example of an ionic compound would be table salt, NaCl. And as we said, mixtures can be homogeneous, so we can have water and sugar. Brass would be an example of a homogeneous mixture. Or gold, that's impure, that's made with different metals, would also be an example of a homogeneous mixture. And an example of a heterogeneous mixture would be water and oil.